Sure, I'm recording this. Let me just check and see if recording is happening or not. Okay, recording is happening. All right, so as I was saying, this is a spectrum down here, okay, where the darker color it is, the less interactive it is. So the lighter color it is, if you can see my laser pointer, that means the more interactive it is, right? So that's why it's called like an interactive spectrum. So as you can see there, when you are talking about stories that, of course, these are game-based stories. So stories that are more player-driven, it will become much more interactive. And then as you go further down in the darker zone here, you would be much less interactive. Now, this entire spectrum is referring to interactive stories. So even if you have a fully traditional story, there might be elements of interactivity, but very less. Okay, there's no such thing as like completely zero, because even if, okay, I'm going to move on. Hope you can still see my slide. So even if you have a fully traditional story, okay, where we normally think, okay, we are reading a novel, or we are reading a manga, or we are watching a film, we think, okay, we are not really interacting anything. Okay, we are just like sitting there and watching it. We are just sitting reading a book, but there is interaction, maybe not with your hands or your fingers, but with your mind, right? So you're using your brain to interact, meaning you're trying to understand the story, you're trying to imagine what's going on, because there are no visuals in the case of novels or books. In the case of like manga, you have the visuals, but you still need to maybe fill in the blanks. You need to connect things, the previous episode, a previous chapter plus the new chapter. You're trying to piece together a bigger story, so you are interacting, but on maybe a more mental or intellectual level. And of course, you have films, television, all this kind of online media, YouTube, what have you, all that. Essentially, the only interaction we have is turn it on and watch it, pause it, turn it off, that kind of thing. But nonetheless, we are still engaging with it mentally. So I don't want to say we are completely zero interaction, which basically means your brain also shut off. If your brain shut off, then basically you're not really paying attention to anything anyway. So that's kind of fully traditional. That's why I say there's some interactivity, but very limited. And most people would even consider it non-interactive, right? Because when we think interactive, we think our body have to move, our hands, our fingers, that kind of thing. Now, for digital storytelling, all right, basically we are talking about games here. For any kind of digital storytelling, for this class, we're talking about games. Of course, you can also talk about animation. It is a form of digital storytelling, as I showed you last week when you all watched that Ginseng animated film from FCI lecturer. That is also a digital storytelling, but it's not really very interactive because you're just watching it, right? So for games, it is characterized by interactivity, very important. And specifically, you as the user playing the game, you are controlling or influencing aspects of the story. You might not be fully controlling it, but aspects of it. And sometimes, okay, in the cases of game stories where there are characters inside that you are controlling, you can be controlling a particular character. You might have other characters that are controlled by the computer, the artificial intelligence or AI in the computer, and you're interacting essentially with a computer interaction with you as the player controlling another character, which is also created within the computer. So it's a kind of multiple layers of interactivity. And the last thing that I wanted to mention, this word is a place or a space digitally that we navigate. All right, so the word there is navigable, which means you can choose where you go through the story that you are playing or through the game that you're playing. Right? So all digital game stories in particular, you're moving through a space, whether it's a more two-dimensional space, three-dimensional space, you are navigating that space, and that is part of the uniqueness of a game story. Unlike, let's say, a novel where you are not really controlling a character that's moving through a space in that way. Maybe the character is moving in your mind, like in your imagination. Okay, so let's start with a very important question. And this is a question you should ask yourself in the groups that you are in. The primary question is game genre. So I'll show you a few in case you don't know what a game genre is. But you're a game students, so I'm assuming you should know. Now, do game genres determine types of stories that you tell? Yes, they do. Very, very much so. Alright? So if you look at some game genres, okay, bear with me, this slide has a lot of words. I don't expect you to read everything. Later, you can read it yourself if you wish. But if you look at this kind of summary of some common game genres, okay, so you have, let's say, action adventure games, you have MMORPG games, you have simulation, platform shooter, whatever. Different types of genres. Okay, it doesn't matter what we call them as long as you know what is happening in these genres. For some of these game genres, stories are not important. Or rather, players who want to play such games, they really not expecting a story, or they don't even want a story in certain cases, right? So if you are thinking about what game you want to make, actually the first question you should ask is, what type of game genre am I interested in first? Because if you choose a game genre that is not very story driven, then the kind of story you make will also be different, and maybe you don't even need a story, in which case you shouldn't choose that game genre. Okay, so that's the important thing to start out with when you're deciding or discussing in your group. Now, typically we associate adventure games with more story, because as you can see there, I've highlighted in the red circle or red ellipsis. Adventure games, typically, you have a lot of things going on. Okay, you have characters with stuff happening to them. They have storyline, they have backstory. There's a plot that's very complicated sometimes, maybe not complicated, but a lot of details. So it lends itself to story, certainly. And adventure games tend to be seen as one of the popular type of genres where stories can be used quite a lot. You can also use stories for action adventure games above, as you can see there. So it also has the word adventure, but the focus should be more on action. So if you did have story in an action adventure game, your story should not be more dominant than the action that your character would be doing, because your player is playing that game expecting a lot of action. If suddenly there's not a lot of action, and then you have a lot of story you have to read, or you have to listen to people talking to know the story, it might make you not happy, because you bought that game with the intention to have a lot of action. Adventure games might have action, but some might totally not have too much high fast pace and very thrilling action. It might not have that kind of action. Then of course there are some games that traditionally we see as almost no or very little story or plot, and those are typically shooter games. Now, can you break this rule? Can you say hey, I don't really care, shooter games don't have story, I'm going to create a shooter game that has a very complicated story, and I don't care, I want to do it. I want to break the rules about the genre of shooter games. Can you do that? Absolutely. You can totally do that. But to do that, you will need to know what is your objective here. Is your main objective to actually break the genre of shooter games, to make your player come in to shoot and then suddenly they got a ton of story to sift through? Or how are you going to do it? Because obviously if a shooter game, the player comes in and not going to shoot, you're going to lose that player, and the player is going to refund your game, or the player is going to curse you, the player is going to say shit about you in Steam comments or any other platform comments. So you gotta have to also think about your audience, right? Or your gamer audience. What are they expecting? You want to mindfuck them by giving them a lot of story, but then you also got to give them what they want, because they are there for a reason. So yes, if you say you want to break the genre, yes, but I also would say don't break it so much that at the end nobody buys your game. Right? So you got to kind of do the balancing act a bit. Now, I'm not going to go through every single type of game here. This is just a kind of snapshot. And there's more, of course. So if we go to my next slide, there's even more games, way more genres. And this is, again, another snapshot. There could be even more different types, new type genres that are coming into the picture. But you can remember, some of you, I still remember when you were introducing yourself in week 1, some of you said, you like dance and rhythm games. I remember, I think it was Song who said he liked dance and rhythm games. And those type of games typically don't have story. Right? So if you are playing a fast-paced rhythmic game and your fingers are trying to master the keyboard action, and then suddenly you got one story on the side there, like trying to tell you some complicated character shit, and you be like, go freaking away, because you can't win that game when you also have to like read text and stuff. So certain games really don't mess with it. Okay, certain game genres, if you break that game genre, fine, but I mean, whether you're gonna get anybody buying it, your guess is as good as mine. Right, so certain games really very difficult or almost impossible to bring in story. Maybe puzzle games can, okay, people have successfully done it with, let's say, like Candy Crush. You know, there's a little bit of like a game, a story skeleton in the background there when you're not doing the actual match 3 or puzzling part of it. So think about what the genre is before you decide what story you want to create, and also whether it's appropriate or not. Now, another type of game genre very, very typically popular for people who want to tell stories is RPG or role-playing game. As you can see, I've circled there. And they're same like adventure, you know, you tend to have a lot of characters, you make a lot of friends, and then you know people's backstory, people know your backstory, things happen to you, you have generally a 3-act structure, you know, things happen and you have an ending of the story, beginning, middle, ending, that kind of thing, hero's journey, all that would fit nicely into RPGs. Now, survival horror is also another genre where surprisingly you can actually input quite a lot of good story, and there are some very, very popular games, survival type horror games, where you do have strong story element. All right, and you might think it is more focusing on survival, but sometimes people want to feel invested in the character. They want to feel like, okay, I want to make my character survive. Why? Because my character has an interesting backstory. Maybe there's certain motivations I don't know. Maybe I want to really know why zombies are trying to kill me. I want to understand the backstory of this zombie apocalypse, for example. Alright, so horror games can be great story vehicles, but of course the catch is your story must have this horror element in order to fit into this genre. Okay, now the last thing I want to say before I move on from this slide, which is very, very like word heavy, is first person shooter games. Now remember, I said shooter games don't have a lot of story generally. You can, if you wish, put some in. Now first person shooter is even harder. Generally speaking, first person games, when you think about story, you have to think about your first person gamer, right? Are you making that first person into a character? Because if the first person is you and you are a character, is it you as a character? Meaning, like, if I'm playing it, is it like Carmen, the lecturer character, or is it Carmen pretending to be another person? So you got to think a little bit about things like character identification, and that is something I will definitely be covering in my lecture on character. So let me move on first. Okay, again, just to remind you, any questions, just turn on the mic and stop me, all right? Because I'm going to keep going. Next is, so I've talked about genre. Genre is very important. Now I'm going to just remind you, of course, last week I talked about story structure. Okay, these are the 2 story structures. Just a quick recap in case you forgot. And this kind of story structure, it doesn't matter whether you're reading a book, whether you're watching a film, watching a TV series, these 2 types of story structure that I taught you would apply in any given situation. As long as there's story, these 2 structures can be used. All right, so that's why I always go to them, because it is almost, I won't say universal, but I would say is commonly used across different platforms, genres, and not just for games, and not just for books, and not just for film and manga, anime, etc. So when we're talking about interactive traditional story, so when you see the word traditional, you might think, oh, traditional, so must be it's not a game. Now interestingly, games can also fit into traditional stories. Traditional meaning it has a kind of very typical 3-act structure, or a very typical hero's journey, or a very typical beginning, middle, and end. So traditional stories, basically stories that are clear cut, you know what's happening, you can follow along. It's not necessarily giving you too much freedom where you can do anything you like. So there's a limited kind of world, but you can definitely interact with it. So I'm going to show you some examples of these games, and later on I'll go greater into detail. And what you might find interesting is that some of these games you might not associate with a traditional story. You might actually think, huh, this one is traditional, man, very traditional. And I'll kind of explain what I mean later. All right. So actually, there's a vast number of games out there which I can consider quite traditional. And these are some which I'm going to talk about in greater detail today. Right, so the first one I showed you is this game called Flower. No words, no text, no narration, just music, sound, and images or visuals. That's kind of an old game. I think it's 2009 if I'm not mistaken, or maybe a little bit later around there. Then this is another very good game. Good meaning a game that has very, very excellent story. And it has a dog. I know you guys are like very into dogs. And it has a dog in it. Later I'll show you a quick trailer of it, so not to worry. And this particular story is based actually on a true historical kind of event. All right, so Flower is a completely imagined kind of a story. Valiant Hearts is not imagined, it's based on true story, but loosely based. That means you're not following exactly the history, but you're taking elements from history to make a very, I would say, for me, it was like one of the most emotional stories I've played. And the dog is quite an important figure in that story for those of you who are into dogs. And can you pet the dog? Yes, you can. Can you play with the dog? Yes, you can. Can the dog help you? Yes, it can. So the dog actually is quite a critical gameplay element as well. Okay, then you have this game. Again, I will also talk about it later. Now, this game is very beautiful visually. You can kind of tell from my choices, I'm very into visual. So I tend to choose games that have a very strong kind of images, very beautiful artwork, and a lot of thought has been put into the kind of images that I created. So this is another short but sweet game. And interestingly, if you remember week 1, I talked about Wan Hazmir, right, who is probably Malaysia's most famous game designer, narrative game designer. And when he came to Utah to visit, because he's our industry advisor, this was a few years back before COVID. When he came to visit, he actually said when he was designing Final Fantasy 15, of which he was the lead narrative designer for Final Fantasy 15 when he was working in Japan, he said one of the games that inspired him was Old Man's Journey. And I almost fell off my chair when he said that, because I played that game and no other student knew like this game at all, because the title make everybody think it's going to be like old man story, very boring. And he said sometimes as game creators, we shouldn't always just look at the games that we know that are the games that we like. We should move beyond, right? Do look at games that you might never look at, and who knows, you might find things in there that you never experienced or thought of if you didn't actually go and check out that game. Then there's this other very famous game. It won quite a few awards. It's a Taiwanese game made by a Taiwanese game company, and it's again like Valiant Hearts, also based on a historical moment in Taiwanese history in the 60s, I believe. And of course, the last game, which I'll talk a little bit but not that much today, is Death Stranding. I will talk a lot more about Death Stranding when I'm looking at character design section of class. Nonetheless, these are some games I'll be talking about today, and I will show you a few trailers as well. And the good news, actually, if you all didn't know, if you all are so hardworking, you haven't even gone to Steam to check out what games are available, you should be happy to know that right now there's Steam Summer Sale, probably the best sale annually by Steam. And almost every game here is less than 10 ringgit except Death Stranding, and Detention I think is like 13 ringgit. But Valiant Hearts, Old Man's Journey, and Flower, they are like super dirt cheap almost. So if you're going to get a game, this is the time to get it. If you don't want to buy it at full price, since these are older games. Alright, moving on. So doing my little bit there to get you all to buy the original game as opposed to cracking it in torrent. Okay, so let's talk a little bit first about ways that interactivity happens in these kinds of more traditional stories. Many ways you can get players or gamers to interact. Now, the level of interactivity, of course, varies. So you have some games where the player controls certain things, but not like a lot. And you are restricted maybe by the screen, how much you can move, and maybe it's a two-dimensional kind of scroller game, in which case you can only move left and right. So those kind of things would also limit you. So the engagement can be minimal. Alright, so Old Man's Journey, the gameplay, you are really only using one kind of gameplay, so you cannot do too many things in that game, and you don't actually have a lot of control over the environment either. The environment is kind of set, and you cannot really explore there. Later you see what I mean when I show you the trailer. Now, contrast this with a game like Flower, where you really have a very immersive three-dimensional experience. So it's like you are like moving around the space. You can fly here, fly there. It's very fast, fluid, with a really beautiful soundtrack. And you are doing puzzles in a really interesting way, which I don't see many games doing, like Flower did back then. Then, of course, Valiant Hearts. You have very strong story, very strong characters. There are 4 different characters. You will play different characters at different points in the game. You solve some puzzles, so you do have quite a bit of thinking to do to solve certain puzzles. You do have some battle scenes, but the battle scenes are, not the kind that you would normally think. It would be like throwing bombs, throwing grenades, and dealing with some of the war scenes that are, or the war environment that you are in, right? Because you're obviously a soldier, as you can see there in that poster there. And of course, you have some traditional stories. Traditional meaning you have a very clear-cut story, but there's tons of space to explore. So some people might disagree with me and say like, am I crazy to say this? But Death Stranding for me is actually very traditional. It's a game where it's really long, but the story is very, very set. You really cannot mess with the story. But I have a lot of freedom in the game to do a lot of things to really explore, but the exploration actually is very well designed. So even though I really want to go everywhere, there's not a lot I can do, because the game is forcing me in a certain kind of direction to fulfill the story agenda of Hideo Kojima, the game designer. Now, the last important thing about interactive traditional stories is your main plot. Okay, so remember last week we talked about plots, right? So plot is basically the things that are happening, right? So you go from point A to point B to point C to point D. These main plot lines, or beats we call them, they really cannot be changed. That's what makes it traditional. You have tight control over that main plot, and players really, who, if they feel like they want to change the main plot, they can't do anything. Okay, but what you are doing instead is you're controlling your character. So you might feel very responsible for your character, because your character has to do certain things that you make your character do, and the plot is driving you in a certain direction. And that would be a good example, would be a game like Detention, where at the end it's based on a true story, so at the end certain things going to happen whether you like it or not. By the way, I'm not going to spoil game. If you haven't played the game, I will generally never spoil it for you. Maybe I might tell you some of the gameplay. If you consider that spoiler, then okay lah, then there's some spoiler, but I won't of course tell you the ending or anything very major. Okay, moving. So now we're going to get into some, this is what I'm going to call the very technical, moving to very technical area, okay? And this is the kind of language I'm going to expect you to start using when you're talking about your own game for this class. And when you're talking to me in consultation, these are the kind of words that I expect you to be using already, okay? So that you are getting familiar. So let's start with the first, which is structural path. So you all know what is structure. You're talking about the, like, skeleton is a structure, but path would be like the direction you're taking. All right, so I'm going to break it down here. You have the linear structural path, and there's a non-linear structural path. Another way of putting it, some people call the linear structural path a progression path. That means you're progressing forward. As you can see here, you have one task, then you move. After you finish this, then you're going to do this. After you finish this, then you're going to do this. So you're progressing, constantly moving from one thing to another thing in a linear manner. Linear meaning like a line, a straight line moving forward. Now, non-linear is different. You can see from this image here. You can start here at the beginning, follow my laser pointer. And you can see this is a line without dots, okay? It's a line that is clear. You're going this way. You can also go this way. You go down here and you can follow my laser. You can go this way here. So that's one path you can take. But in a non-linear kind of structural path, see all these dotted lines, they are alternate pathways. So a non-linear structural path is giving you all options. So I might choose to follow this very dark line here, but someone else might be like, no lah, I don't want to go this way, how about I go this way? So you take a different path and then you go this way, and then when you are here, then you're like, okay, never mind, I go back this way. So basically you're kind of doing your own thing. The path is there, but there are many, and they are sometimes intersecting means they can like cross over. So non-linear type of structural path is what we call emergent. As you do things, things will open up. You don't do it, things will not open up. So let's say I start here and I move here. When I move here, this pathway, I don't open already. Because this is a dotted line, I did not take this path. I took this path, so this dotted line gone. Gone meaning, you know, it is not a path I can go to anymore. But if I'm here and I take this dotted line, then suddenly this path will open. And then now I can take this path, and if I can go backwards, I can go back here. Okay, assuming I come here. But if I didn't, I come here, then of course, certain paths again won't be visible to me. So non-linear is, from a game designer perspective, which is what you guys are, non-linear is complicated to do. Non-linear needs a lot of time and also a lot of thought being put into it, obviously. I'm going to break it down a little bit more cleaner for you. So let's look at this next slide. So simply put, so I'm going to give it in a simple way. Structural path, basically there's two. It's either you're going to go linear or non-linear, as I've shown you. Now, if you're going non-linear, there's two more options, which is what we call the open narrative path or the branching narrative path. Linear, I already taught you this last week. 3x structure or hero's journey. Now, if you go online and do research, you can find a lot of other models, other than 3x structure. Don't know, like a Freytex, pyramid, this, that. Now, I didn't really care about a lot of those because a lot of those are not necessarily game related. They might be for novels and other forms of writing. So I am focusing more on these because, as I've told you, they are more commonly used in games. All right. So that's the linear path. Now, this non-linear is very, how shall I put it? I won't say it's very difficult, but I would say there's a lot of stuff here. Okay, here especially, this branching is like one major headache waiting to happen here. So what am I going to do today? So today, actually, I'm mostly going to focus here, linear. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about non-linear elements, but these two blue color pathways here, I'm not going to touch it until next week. Why? Because I want you guys to master this. No point mastering this if you haven't mastered this, because all games you mostly start here in terms of story. If you want to go into more complex territory, then only you move here. So if you're a beginner, it's always good to start with the easiest. No need to like make your life difficult and start with very complicated, because then you are going to make life unnecessarily difficult, especially if you don't know what you're doing. Okay, so that is a clear pathway I'm setting for us for today. But when you see this, you might think, oh, linear, yeah, very easy lah. Why she don't want to teach the hard one? I'm ready for like some pro material. Now, you might think this is... Xiaolei, can you turn off your microphone again? I think it's your voice I hear. Okay, now back to this.
Sorry.
It's okay. Okay, can you guys see my slide? I hope so, because I'm back. Just now I had to like jump screen. Alright, so we're gonna stay here, but I will tell you this path that you see, which seems very simple, is actually not that simple at all. So let's move. This one I already talked about last week. I will definitely come back to this. The only thing I want you to remember, because I will use these words a lot today, is remember Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Don't need to remember all these words for now. Most important is remember Act 1 is the beginning. The beginning of the story is Act 1. Act 2 is the middle. Lot of stuff happening in the middle of the story. Act 3 is when the story is going to conclude, the resolution. So if you still remember last week, the Ginseng animated short film, Act 1 is actually all the backstory about the ginseng in China thousands of years ago, how the ginseng was created, blah blah blah. Then when that guy from China, the merchant, brought the ginseng to Malaysia, then we are here in Act 2, where all the shit happened in Malaysia with that baby, with the mother, with the grandma, all that happened in Act 2, all the craziness. Then at the Act 2 is kaboom, okay, kaboom, the explosion, and then all things started to slowly like wrap up at the end. Of course, you got a little bit of a teaser there with the cats, but the cat story tak boleh pakai lah. Sorry, I'm gonna use English. Sorry, a cat story is like it is not going to be developed further. Okay, the ending is just like fun lah. Just put some cats in there to show the saga continues. If you still remember, okay. So I'm going to use these words a lot. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Please remember what they stand for. Okay, beginning, middle, and end. Now moving on. And also Hero's Journey. Now Hero's Journey, I won't talk about it so much, but I might refer to it from time to time. Now don't need to remember all these categories. As I said, these are not necessary to be remembered or memorized, but it's just good to know that Hero's Journey is always what we call a cycle, right? You start and then you come back to the beginning, so to speak. And the greatest or best example of this Hero's Journey is this game Brothers, done by this guy Joseph Fares, who also did this game that I will be talking about both these games later. I'll be showing you some examples from it. Okay. But before I continue, I just want to say I'm going to do a little divergent path here. And just to let you know, not everything is as simple as you think when it comes to linear path, right? Because linear, you always think start at the beginning, Act 1, then move Act 2, then Act 3. But games kind of like to like fuck around with you a little bit. So now in game world, games tend to like to not start at the beginning, which is Act 1. So where do they like to start? So I'm going to introduce this term now, important term. It's a Latin word. Basically, it means in the middle of things. Okay, you see the definition, and then at the bottom here. So medias in res or in medias res basically refers to being in the middle of things. So it's a kind of storytelling technique that started in novels, where you don't start at the beginning. You don't start with once upon a time in a small town in Terengganu, there was a mother, a father, and their 2 children. Okay, you don't start there. You straight away start with he was killed last night. A lot of blood was spilled where he was sleeping. Okay, you are like right in the middle of the action. And when you have this kind of beginning, it's definitely not a typical Act 1 beginning, because you're not starting in Act 1 where it's just an intro. You are actually starting in the middle, which means you are starting in Act 2. So if you think about this as your timeline over here, you're moving forward in your timeline. Usually Act 1 will start here in my laser pointer here. Act 2 will be all in the middle. Act 3 is at the end. But hey, you drop the character or you drop the reader or the gamer right in the middle of Act 2. And then, so that your gamer or player is not confused, slowly you backtrack lah. Slowly you go backwards to like, hey, what happened really happened like 3 years ago. So you're going back to Act 1. Then, okay, now you know already. Okay, thank you. Let's move forward. Alright, so you got a little bit of that action going on. And why do game designers like this strategy? It's because of a whole bunch of gamers who, I'm sure some of you are like that. You turn on your game, you start your game. The minute you start new game and you start the game and you're like, oh my god, one stupid cutscene 10 minutes long. Oh my god, I have to read like so much words, like, oh, then you'll be like cursing. Can I skip? How to skip? Where's the skip button? Right? So if you are that type of gamer, it's like, oh my god, I want to skip, I cannot skip. You are the kind who'll be like, I love in medias res. Because you are the kind of person who's like, I like to start immediately. I'm already like in the thick of the action. I don't want to read no backstory. I don't want to see any cutscene. I want to like do the thing that I'm here to do. So that is typically the typical kind of action-oriented gamer. And there's a lot of us like that. I mean, me also, sometimes I'm very impatient and I don't want to read like the beginning stuff. If possible, straight away go to action. But it's not always possible. But there are game companies that give you what you want. So let's talk about one of these examples. Okay, I'm going to show you an example, but let me just show you how it kind of looks like in a visual format, the structure. So if you look at this, yellow is beginning, middle is red, end is gray color. So conventional, this is the 3x structure lah, right? You can see a 3x structure. Now in medias res, you can start many ways. So in medias res, you can start with a little bit of middle, then go backwards to the beginning, and then go back to the middle again. So you're kind of like going back and forth. But you can notice this second one, which is the most interesting. You completely in the middle, then the beginning like completely throw away already. So where's the beginning? No beginning. Because at some point, nobody cares. Okay? Unfortunately, I cannot think of any game like that. Maybe there are, but I just don't play this kind of games. So, sorry ladies and gentlemen, I can't give you an example. Those of you, if you play a lot of different kind of games that are not story driven, maybe you have games that look like this. Okay? No beginning, you don't even remember. Then, of course, you have the last possibility, which is very much more complicated, is kind of like a lot of flashback. Okay, you are in present moment, then you flash back a little bit of past, then you come back present moment, then you flash back a little bit of past. It's a little bit like some movies you see got a lot of flashback one. And some people actually don't like it because it gets confusing, like, hey, why always got flashback, very irritating. But some people like it because it's like, okay, I need to take a break now. Okay, I need to take a bit of break. Okay, so I know some backstory. Okay, lah, okay, getting bored. Okay, let me do some action. Yeah, okay, need to rest again. So it could also be a pacing thing to let you have some rest, get some story in you, and then you can continue, right? So the best example that I'm going to share of in medias res is this game. I don't know how many of you played it. It's old Uncharted, of course, Uncharted 2. For me, okay, I'm not a huge Uncharted fan. I have dabbled means I just play a little bit, like, you know, a few minutes or maybe an hour or two of all the Uncharteds I've played, but it's not really my thing. Okay, maybe too male, too much testosterone, whatever, too much killing sometimes, not all. The earlier Uncharteds are better, but later one got a lot of shooting. Now, for Uncharted, for me, Uncharted 2, story-wise, it really is like outstanding, alright? And a lot of people think that too. And what makes Uncharted 2 outstanding is because it starts in medias res. So, we are now going to watch a little clip there. So that's my little clip animal. Okay, so let me see if you guys can see. If you cannot see my video, let me know. Okay, let's proceed. So let me just make sure it's recording already. So for that particular opening cutscene, if you know, if you remember, I said you cutscene first. The very first like short, like few seconds was a cutscene, and then you move to gameplay. But the cutscene also is starting, of course, in Act 2, right? Even though you're not interacting at the very start, but you're starting in Act 2, so it is doing the in medias res style. And the other important thing that I did want to mention is you start with a very not only exciting part of the story, but your life is on the line, like immediately, and you don't know what the hell is going on. So it's very important in terms of whoever's doing the writing part of it. The first words that you read is what's going on, which is a great mirror of you as the gamer. When you play it, you're probably thinking like, hey, what's going on now? Why suddenly like that? Right? So it is doing that kind of style to pull you into the game. And of course, look at how they designed that level in terms of moving through that train car and how you actually have to progress. The different levels of excitement that's building when certain parts like come out, and then you have to hold on for dear life, and then you figured out you have to enter the car to be able to escape the car, and then certain parts you don't have place to jump. So all that is part of the level design for this opening scene. Okay, so I'm going to move on. So that is in medias res example. Now when you're thinking about your story, all right, so in your group when you're discussing, always remember, when you're thinking about your story, you might be thinking of like, oh, you know, I'm going to have the train car, you know, I'm going to have look at all these, like if this is a skeleton, I'm going to look at all these details here. Okay, what am I going to put in here? What am I going to put in there? Be careful that you are not getting too lost in the details at the start. Okay, at the start, remember, you're thinking of the entire structure. So just now when I show you Uncharted 2, I'm showing you the details. And that's how people can easily get lost in the details. But if I pull away, I zoom out, then I'm actually telling you, hey, what you saw in Uncharted is actually in medias res. That is a structure. That's like a zoom out look at the entire Uncharted 2 story. It's not just about that opening scene alone. So story structure really is about the bigger picture. Okay, when you're looking at the bigger picture, then you are able to see the entire thing. Because if you're looking here, you're looking only at one part. And if you don't look at the bigger picture, you might not realize actually the part I showed you earlier is this part. And that is not even a human skeleton. This is the ape skeleton. This is the human skeleton. So if you look too much into the details, when you zoom out, the story that you create might not actually be the story that you thought you were creating. Right? So essentially my message here is don't start with the details. Always start big. Always start thinking about the overall structure is how. Start with the basics. I'm going to use 3-act structure. Okay. Am I going to start in Act 2 first, then move to Act 1? Or I'm going to go to the ending first? I mean, if you want to do that, very rarely is that done. Right? So think about the big parts, how you want to move the big parts, then only focus on the detail later. If not, you're going to confuse yourself. You're going to think you're making this game, but actually you're making a different kind of game. Now, let's talk about linear in greater detail. Now, the term that game developers usually use when they talk about game that is linear is they talk about this string of pearls model. So you can see here pearls down there in the image. So basically you have a string and you're putting all the pearls together, right, in a kind of one thing that you create, which is like a necklace, and it looks very beautiful because you have all your pearls strung together. So I'll be using this metaphor a lot, this pearls metaphor. And as I showed you earlier in earlier slides, games are all about tasks, action, things that you have to do. First, you must walk here. Then when you walk here, you must take this thing. Once you take this thing, then you must walk there. When you walk there, you meet that guy. Then you talk to that guy. So everything is like task-based. Do this, then do this, then do this. Some tasks small, some tasks are big. Some tasks are very interconnected. You go to a place and you got to do many tasks, then only you can move on. So you cannot run away from the fact that it's a game, which means you are very action-based, task-based. Now, the rule number 1 of linear, what makes linear linear is exactly what I have in the slide there. Every player who plays the game will experience the same events, the same task in the same order. That is what makes a linear game called linear. So, if you've played Uncharted 2, you love that game. Okay, 10 years later, you decide to replay it for nostalgia. You turn it on. It is not suddenly going to take you to Act 1. It will still start where it started, which is where I showed you just now. Right? So that's a classic definition of linear. Whether you're playing it today, tomorrow, you're replaying it 1,000 times, it will always start at the same place and you will play the same events in the same order. And I'm talking big picture. I'm not talking about the details, whether you have the Nathan character, you know, is he jumping left first or jumping right? Those are small details. The big detail is he's always starting in that train car that is about to crash. He's always going to have to go through that level to be able to make it and finish that. Then only he is able to progress. So that is linearity. All Uncharted games are linear in that sense. Now, a linear story, ladies and gentlemen, does not mean it's simple. You can have linear story that is very difficult to understand. Okay, you are playing that whole game. Everything is task based. One task, another task, another task. You play it 1,000 times. It's still the same thing. But you can play it many times and you still don't know what actually is about. A good example is like Death Stranding. So that's a game which many people have played many times and they still like, actually, what is it about? Huh? They still cannot figure out the story. So it doesn't mean linear doesn't mean simple. Linear can be very complicated, but it's still the same event, same order, same experience. Maybe not same experience, but the time you play it is same event, same order. In terms of difficulty, of course, linear does not mean everything is easy as well, right? So you can go from easier to harder to very max difficulty. You can have variations of difficulty throughout the game, and that is still considered a linear experience. Typically it's found in traditional entertainment, as I've told you, but as I'm telling you now, games also using it a lot, and you'll be surprised, so many games actually still using linear structure. Even though most people would think games is not linear, that's not necessarily true. So let's look at this. If you have a linear game, you're going to do a lot of tasks. But how are you going to put story into the game? Because story is about what? Story is about people, events, things that happen to these people. Alright, if it's task based, you do certain tasks, but there might be things happening that you want the player to know, and the player is not going to know it unless you do certain things to give that information to your player. So what are some of these strategies? Simplest one, which you just saw in Uncharted, have a cutscene, or sometimes we also call it cinematics. Okay, either way, it doesn't really matter the terminology, but you're having a scene in there which the player cannot do anything, and the player is like, you as a player, you're watching that scene, that cutscene. Okay, you're getting story input through that cutscene where you're just there, can't do anything, and just watching. Now, of course, we have games with very high advancement in cutscene where you can stand there, you can actually move around a little bit, and then it's also like a cutscene, but it's not fully interactive, but you can feel like you are not like completely static. Okay, you are still in that moment. It's just that the story is also being told. All that would still fall under cutscene or cinematic, so that's one very popular way. Now, another strategy how to put in story, you can put in story through some elements in the environment of the game. Okay, what do I mean by environment? Your surroundings, whatever space of the game you're in. Okay, I will go into detail. There are 3 points which I'll talk about in a few seconds. The last, of course, is in between when you're doing certain action, when you finish certain action, the rest moments when you're resting. You don't have to have a cutscene, which is more like a video playing, where you have action or you have movement and talking cutscene. You can also just have static or still images, where there's totally no movement, nobody is doing any kind of action. It's not watching a video, you just see an image being played, or being displayed on your screen for you. So for elements within the game, these are things I'm sure you all are familiar with. You can have things around you telling you the story, such as your natural environment around you. So maybe you're in a jungle. Certain things in the jungle can tell you what happened in that jungle like many years ago. Maybe you are in a town or in a city, and then you have human-made structures. So based on what buildings you see, based on what are the structures around you, you can understand the story. Is this a science fiction story? Is this a futuristic type of storyline? Or is it an apocalyptic story? All this, you are getting that kind of story information through these surrounding structures. Okay, you can also have supporting characters, or what we call NPC, non-playable characters. These are characters you don't control by a computer. They are there, they tell you stuff, right? They give you the information, and that is also can be story-based information for you to piece together the story of this world that you are in. Now, the last one is you can actually have ambient sound or dialogue or voiceovers. That means you don't have any person standing in front of you, but you can hear the voice of someone explaining or narrating the story, and that can also be a form of storytelling using sound. Now, for static or still images, there's usually 2 types. You can have text, that means you can have words together with the images, so you're reading and looking at the images. Or sometimes you can just have the images and you have some narration, someone talking in the background. Either way, you are still getting info. And all these are ways to get story-based information conveyed to the player, not just using cutscene. You have a lot of different strategies as well. Okay, so moving on. Now I'm going to go back. Remember I talked about the string of pearls. So now the problem with pearls is they generally all kind of, they're round and they more or less look the same. Maybe slightly different variations in color, maybe size. So I'm going to use the same concept, string of pearls, but I'm going to talk about like using something like this, which is like beads. Okay, so if you think about a string of beads here, you have all these different beads, different color, different shapes. The variation of color, not that much, more like bluish color, but look at the texture is different. So you have these big ones, slightly bigger, similar, and then you have some look a bit glass like. Okay, So what you have here is you have kind of like a necklace which you have put together of different elements, some repeating elements, some non-repeating elements of these beads, and you're stringing it together to form something, a kind of path which connects back, a kind of maybe hero's journey, maybe. So I'm using this as a symbol or metaphor for what I'm about to talk about next. So here is when I'm going to use this visual, all right? And this is a very important visual to understand. It's not really the kind of meaning that you would typically think. Usually when we look at this, okay, look, follow my laser pointer. If we look at this line here, usually we think line means something straightforward. Okay, it connects one thing to the other, which is true. It's connector. It's a connective thing. So whenever you see this line, it's basically a linear path. Okay, you don't interact much. You kind of have to follow it. So the lines are things you cannot do much. They are there, and whether you like it or not, it's going to happen. Now the circle is when you have the non-linear elements. Now in a linear game, you cannot have total linearity where you don't have any interactivity. You need to have this interactive, something like break a little bit from the story so you can do stuff. Okay? And this doing stuff, this interactive, is the non-linear elements. And there's sometimes choice involved, meaning what stuff you want to do first. Okay, so this circle represents that. And depending on the size, the bigger the circle, maybe more things you have to do. Smaller circle, less things you have to do. Now, white circle only. Now, yellow and green a bit different. So yellow is Act 1. Green is Act 3. Remember, Act 1 and Act 3, they are pretty much beginning and ending. Maybe you can do some stuff in there, but they are there for a reason, because they are kind of like guiding the middle part. Right? So you start somewhere, you end somewhere. So this is very typical 3-act structure. You start here, maybe you have to do a certain kind of action, but nonetheless, it's an introduction. Then you move to all the things you have to do, and then you end here. Now, all this line could represent the kind of non-interactive elements, such as what? Story elements, such as what I've told you before in the previous slide. So you can have cutscene here. Maybe you can have static images. Maybe you can have words that tell you the story. Whatever all these lines are, they are giving you story input. Once you're in the circle is when you're doing stuff. Okay, so immediately from this string of beads or string of pearls, you can see there's quite a lot of long lines, which means quite a lot of story is being given to you. Your circle, you have some, but the circle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 only. Okay, so not that many. Now let's talk about a different string. So this one even less. You only have 4 beads or 4 pearls. So you don't have that much choice of story, but they are bigger. So because the circle is bigger, it means maybe more things you can do within the circle. But look at this long line. So most likely after the introduction, you have one damn long cutscene or such a lot of story is being told here. Okay, so this is the part that you got no choice. Then only you proceed. So based on the visual that you see here in this string of pearls, immediately, I don't have to ask you your story. I immediately have an idea already just from your use of circle and line. And let's go a little bit more complicated. Let's say I add more stuff to the middle one. And let's say you have a final one here, also very different. So notice now the middle one, you're adding more circles. Okay, so, but very important, look at all the circles. They are about the same size. So you know, throughout the course of this game, maybe you have 4 levels. 1, 2, 3, 4 in your Act 2. And all levels are pretty much same in terms of maybe level of difficulty. And then you end. But the beginning is the biggest. So a lot of shit is happening here. Maybe the most exciting because you got a lot of choice. And then you got to rest a lot. Okay, got a lot of story here. And then you do. And then you reach the end. But all this more or less the same size, which means the same, more or less the same amount of stuff going on. Now, if you look at this string, slightly different. Most of the action, most of the stuff or choice is happening here. Okay, because this is the biggest. But you actually have a lot of stuff going on also. It's just size-wise, this is the biggest. But here you have so many more pearls compared to this. This one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So more. So what does it tell you? The length of your string of pearls is also telling me the length of your game. Is your game a long game? 20 hours, 30 hours, 40 hours, 100 hours? Or is your game a short game? You know, you can be done in like 2-3 hours? Or is it kind of a middle, kind of like, you know, 10-15 hours you can be done? So the String of Pearls is a visual guide to how your game kind of looks like overall in terms of structure. Okay, why am I talking about this? It's because later, not right now, but much later, when I meet you guys for consultation, when you start doing your group preparation, start designing your game, I'm going to meet your group by group, usually during tutorial, and I'm going to ask you to show me stuff, right? So one of the first earliest things I'm going to ask you to show regarding your game is I'm going to ask you to show me your String of Pearls. So I don't want you to talk, I don't want to see any words. I just want you to show me the visual of your String of Pearls, and that will immediately tell me how long is your game, how much stuff you have going on in your game. Does your game have a lot of story as represented in this like lines where you cannot do anything? What roughly does your game look like on a structural, skeletal level? Okay, so that is usually what I will ask, and I find it to be very useful because then you don't have to talk to me anything. You just show me through your visual first. If I see the visual makes sense, then when I listen to you, it will also make sense. But if your visual is very like don't know what you're doing, your visual is like confusing, or suddenly you no more circle, you give me one triangle, okay, then I'll be like, what's going on here? All right, so think of this String of Pearls as a helpful visual tool to help you structure your story. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, maybe not. All right, moving on. So let's talk about game by game. I'm going to break down a few games, not a lot, just a few. So if you think about this game Flower, I told you no words being spoken, no narration, no text, nothing. It's just visual and music, all right, and some sound effects. And look at how I did the pearls. So for all these games, I've played the games, therefore I can create the String of Pearls. You cannot create a String of Pearls if you haven't played the game to the end, because then you wouldn't know how the game actually plays out or how the game actually unfolds. So if you look at this String of Pearls straight away, what can you tell me from this String of Pearls? Anybody want to try? What does this String of Pearls up there tell you? Anyone? Hello, people. Is it too complicated? You are like very lost?
More like there's like a couple of parts I'm seeing. There's like a lot of like side quests or narratives there's gonna be explaining until like in the middle section or something like that, and then go ahead. It's hard to explain, but it is quite long.
Okay,
a lot of content.
Okay, you're talking about this flower game, right? Right, Hafiz?
Yes.
Okay. Now, one thing when you... Okay, thank you. Now, one thing you will notice from this String of Pearls, notice you can't see the line. You cannot see the string. The string seem to like invisible or disappeared. There must be a string because a String of Pearls always have string, but whether or not you can see it is a different thing. So if you look at previous string, you can see the string very clearly, but here you don't see it so much, or you don't see it at all. So this tells you for this particular game, you don't have any non-interactive part. Because remember what's the string representing? It represents non-interactive linear path. So here, all the entire game is all interactive. So straight away, you know this game, they are not trying to give you the story in a non-interactive manner. The story has to be delivered also interactively. So that is kind of what you can tell from this String of Pearls, number one. Number two, of course, you can see there's a lot of different action you can do in these pearls here. And you can also tell they are roughly, almost all of them are the same size, which means roughly you're doing different levels, but the amount of stuff you have to do is roughly the same. Okay, so that tells you a little bit about this game. Now, I am going to have to show you now the video so you have an idea. I don't think many people would know this game. So let me tell me if you can see the video. Whoa. Can you see the video now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, back to slide. You can see the slide, right? Yes.
Yes, miss.
Okay, very good. So if you think about a game like Flower, which I just showed you a little bit, of course you didn't, most of you I don't think have played it. So for a game like Flower, you don't actually have static or still images at all, if you follow my pointer. So this wouldn't apply. How are you going to convey the story? So this, for me, Flower is a really, really unique game. And the company that created that game, they started out as game design students. And when they created the company, that was the first game they made. The game design graduates created a company called That Game Company, and then this is an American game company, and then that's the first game they created, and they kind of won a lot of awards for doing something that was unheard of at that time, to make a game that has no violence and is about like flowers. But strangely enough, if you play the game, the story is very dark. All right, I won't say more. I don't want to spoil it for you guys. So they don't have static images or still images at all. They don't have any cutscene or cinematic. So everything is told using environmental elements, and they don't have any characters, no human beings, nothing, no voice over, nothing. So really it's only one thing, which is this one. They are using natural and human-made structures. So what you see is natural environment, but later on, as you progress in the Act 2, there's many Act 2 pearls. When you progress, Act 2 is going to get progressively darker. Darker meaning seems like we are living in a world like a kind of like apocalypse world, and you will start seeing human-made structures that are kind of like degrading, or in an apocalyptic state. All right, so they don't look nice anymore. So as you're playing the game, you will ask questions like, hey, how come this works like that? What's going on? Then you're trying to ask questions, but of course the game doesn't really answer them, and you have to figure out through your gameplay. And if you can finish the game and unlock the game, then you will get it. Okay, but for me, the ending was a bit like a what the F kind of moment for me. But you have to have a lot of patience, because it's not an easy game, even though it looks easy, but it's not that easy to do the controls for the flower action for the gameplay. Alright, so moving on. So that's one example. Very, I would say, experimental and quite a unique game for that reason. Then you have this game, Old Man's Journey, and oh boy, I'm gonna have to show you that video again. Okay, this is gonna make me practice how to show you video. Okay, 1 second, guys. Okay, 1 second. Okay, you guys taught me I have to show the share app. Yes, alrighty. Okay, now the music is really from the game. I love the music so much, so I really hope you guys can hear the music. Okay, I'm gonna play now. You can see my screen, right? I think. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let me just sort of show you a few important things in this game. I'm just cutting the sound for now. So if you look at this game, okay, you see this screen that I'm paused at right now. The gameplay really, I must say, is truly unique. You are manipulating the environment or the terrain in the environment. So you can see here when he's walking, every time you see this yellow color, oh sorry, my pointer doesn't work now, but every time you see can you see those yellow lines, the shining yellow lines, once you see the yellow lines, light up, it means you can manipulate them. And your goal in this game is to manipulate it in such a way so the man can walk across to the other side. So the game is really getting you, it's kind of like a puzzle walking simulator. The guy is, all he's doing is walking, and you have to facilitate or enable him to walk by manipulating the environment or the terrain so that the lines all connect and he can move from one place to the other, even if there's a huge wall here. So that's essentially the gameplay, and you move through very different environments, and the reward that you get, okay, where is it? Okay, so the reward, so when you finish a particular area or environment, a particular location, okay, so it's a man who's traveling back to his hometown. When he's moving through different towns, when you finish that town, that level, your reward is you will get a drawing like this. Okay, so this is basically a still image. Of course, in this trailer they make it like not still, but actually it's a still image. So your goal in the game is to collect all these images, which are like photographs from his life. Alright, so you're an old man, you're playing an old man, and you're going back to your hometown, and along the way you're accumulating photos of your life, and that is how the story is being told. Okay, I'm going back to my normal screen now. Okay. Oops. Okay. Okay, so as you can see here, oops, where am I? Next. Oh yeah, and if you look at the string of pearls, basically the levels, you have the line here represents the time that you get the still or static images, and you can stay there as long as you want to look at the images to see what is about, to figure out based on the photographs what you think happened to the old man when he was young. And each level is more or less the same duration, and it's not a very long game. I think you can complete it in like a couple of hours, 3 or 4 hours, that kind of thing. Okay, so let me just check I'm recording. Okay, so if you look at this, back to this slide again, what is being used here, this game is a great example of this purple part here, static or using still images. For the old man's journey, you don't have any words and you don't have any narration, so you just see the image very beautifully. Of course, the artwork is fantastic. So you see the photograph or the drawing of the photograph, and when you look at it, then you slowly try and figure out what happened to this man. Of course, there is a story there. It's like something happened to him, something I cannot say, but it's quite an emotional story when you reach the end lah, of course. And it's a very unique story because no talking, no dialogue, no narration, nothing. Right? So like Flower is telling a story through visuals alone and also through the action that you would do. And the action, like I said, the gameplay is quite unique. Alright, moving on. Okay, so now we have Valiant Hearts. And as I said, this is a game based on history or certain events that happened in World War I. And the company that made it, this is Ubisoft in France. Now Ubisoft has many branches in different parts of the world. Okay, maybe not that many, but a few. And the one in France I find the most interesting because they're a smaller company. They can do games that are a little bit more maybe like independent style. Okay, they're not doing the typical kind of Ubisoft type games. And if you can see from this string of pearls, it gives you a good idea that it kind of, you know, continues along. It got quite a lot of story being told. This is a game where the cutscene is telling you the story, and the cutscene is in the form of like a animation. And you have places in your string of pearls where you can do quite a lot of things, but the biggest action actually you can see comes towards the end. Okay, so this is a game that really nicely builds. It's very cute, and then you are like I was very into it. Cute dog, everything. You play different characters as well. Different times you play different characters, but at the end there's like quite a emotionally heart-wrenching kind of thing that you have to do at the end. And let me just tell you, this game was like killed me. Okay, killed me, like crying all happening at the end. Okay, that's just me. You guys, I don't know, but I've told some of my students in the past, they went and bought the game. It's very cheap now. I think it's like what, 5 ringgit or 6 ringgit. So and you can easily pour in like 4 or 5 hours or more into it, depending on how fast you play. It's a very well designed game, I must say. Beautiful art, and of course I'm going to be showing you a little bit of it. Okie dokie. Wait, let me just cue it up first. Alrighty, you should be able to see something now. I'll put the sound as well, not too loud.
And follow their faithful canine companion. First, there's Emile, a French prisoner of war who ends up peeling potatoes for the Germans after a single bloody charge. Then there's Lucky Freddy, the American volunteer who always seems to find his way out of danger. Anna, the rose of the trenches, who's knee-deep in mud and blood, next to her boys. And there's George, the British aviator who lied about knowing how to fly. And finally, Carl, alone, lost in the maze of trenches and sick with love for Marie, Emile's daughter. Between 1914 and 1918, inside the trenches of the Western Front, millions of men fought, lived, and died. Some made it. Some did not. Here are their stories.
Okay. So the music as well is really, really powerful. Okay, and beautiful as well. So that is also another kind of plus point of that game. Okie doke, back to slide. Yeah. So what you will find in this particular game, other than the very strong story, as you can tell from the trailer just now, they are also very character driven, right? So the trailer was designed in such a way that it's trying to focus on individuals that experience the war, and that immediately tells you this is the kind of game where they are very focused on the stories of each character. Just from the trailer, it will tell you a lot. And for this particular game, there are different kinds of gameplay, even though primarily it's a platform scroller game, but there are parts of the game where you break from the stroller and you a scroller type of platform style, and you move into a different kind of screen, which I cannot really explain without spoiling it too much. So I'll let that be. And like I say, it's dirt cheap, so you guys totally get it. And the dog is really awesome. The dog, by the way, is historical. It's supposed to refer to, in World War I, apparently there were actual dogs that were used in the war to help to bring like medicine and to help with rescue efforts. So the dog is not just put in there because for fun, have a cute element, is historically accurate as well. So that's another thing I like about this game. To get the full achievement for this game, you will go around the various war zones and you will also collect objects, which are the actual objects from World War I, that they are showing you what are some of the things the soldiers carried, what are some of the things that people actually used during that time. So there's that historical element in there. Okay, moving on. So what kind of ways or strategies to tell story in Valiant Heart? Obviously, as I said, you do have cutscenes and cinematics similar to what you all saw just now in the trailer. You will have some cutscenes to give you the backstory about certain characters. Most of the time it is through cutscenes. Okay, you don't have static or still images because everything is constantly moving, unless you're talking about some not so fast-paced cutscene. But generally speaking, the cutscenes are like a kind of animated short animation or short animated clip. And for all these environmental elements, they are of course also there. Alright, so you do see the structures around you. Like I said, you collect stuff that is from that era of World War I, and that is giving you more story. When you collect certain items, then you have a pop-up where they will give you text, and there'll be some words to explain what is it that you actually collected. Voice over, yeah, you have some voice over as well. Okay, so you have a few different elements going on there in this Valiant Heart game. Then the last game that I'm going to talk about with some, not so much detail, but a little bit, is Death Stranding. So you can see for Death Stranding, look at the string of pearls. Quite a lot of story being conveyed in these lines here. And if you know anything about Hideo Kojima, you will know that he loves his cutscene. Okay, he secretly wants to be a film director, movie director. So he has quite a bit of cutscene. And you can also see the circles are of varying sizes, okay, because different things or different places you go to, you have different kinds of action. Some action like very, very complicated, difficult to execute, and then some quite easy as well. So that's why you have different sizes of the pearls. And you can see here the biggest one is close to the end, but then something really weird, something quite unusual, and I don't think any game has this type of string of pearls, which is, notice one long line here from the last Act 2 scene to the ending. One long line. Usually nobody will drag so long one. Usually from here to here is short. So Kojima is like really breaking the boundary here, because this cutscene, ladies and gentlemen, which is here, is almost 2 hours long. Okay, so for most people who play this game, when they reach this point and they are starting this cutscene, and then it's like 15 minutes later the cutscene continue, then 30 minutes later the cutscene continue, then 1 hour the cutscene continue, and you're asking yourself like, am I playing a game, or am I watching a movie, or what? When is it going to end? Is this the end? Is the game going to end with a movie? Is what I was asking the whole time. Now I have no issue because I like movies, but for other people who like didn't expect this, they are like, hey, what the hell, Kojima? What are you trying to do there? So people got a little bit pissed. Some people. But if you get this far, you're really invested in the story, and you really also want to know what the hell is going on. If you hate the game, there are lots of haters, you won't get this far. By the time you reach this cutscene, you already cannot take it already, because this cutscene is already very long. So, you know, everybody have their own preferences. So I'll just show you a quick clip, and the clip is just basic. Or maybe what time is it now? Let me see. Okay, maybe I'm just going to skip it. Later, if I have time, I'll show you the clip, because the clip is basically just a trailer to kind of let you see all the different elements there are. But I'll just skip to here because I'm worried I cannot finish the slides. So for Death Stranding, essentially, how are they conveying the story? Many, many ways. I would say always. So you have everything. So you have obviously a lot of cutscenes. You have a lot of environmental narrative. There's a lot of like weird, funny structures, human-made structures, futuristic structures. Of course, there's natural environment that's slightly unnatural because of certain things that happen in history. So when you see those things, when you're moving in that kind of environment that look... yes.
Are you sharing like some sort of cutscene right now, or?
No, I'm not sharing anything. Now I'm still in the slide.
Like, where is this music?
Can you all still see my... You can hear music, really? The hell? No, it's not from me.
I didn't hear any music.
Okay.
Yeah, this is why. I think it's on your part.
I don't think I didn't play anything else, so I'm not too sure. Okay. Let's hope it's not some ghost in my machine. Okay, but can you all see my...
There's music.
There's music? I don't hear anything. Is anybody else's mic on? I'm definitely not playing a video, don't worry. Okay, so don't worry, I'm not playing the video. You're not missing anything. So I don't know, maybe... Hafiz, maybe turn off your mic and see what happens. Like mute yourself.
Probably, yeah.
Or maybe it's your own...
Oh, yeah, I think I know.
your own
Wait,
feedback.
I think I know, miss.
Okay, is it me? I did something?
No.
Okay.
I think it's other string. I just string. Somebody is opening. Oh god.
Okay, no worries. Okay, you all can still see my slide, right? I'm at this slide. Okay, so I didn't show the Death Stranding video. Later I'll show when there's time. Okay, so for this particular slide for Death Stranding, as I said, you have like everything. Every method to convey stories, Kojima has done it. Or he has utilized all the methods. So I think I was here talking about structures. So his game is kind of like a science fiction, post-apocalyptic kind of very far into the future type of game. So you do see a lot of natural environment there, but the natural environment is a little weird. Okay, so when you see the natural environment, you'll be like, oh, rainbow. And then you're like, hey, why is rainbow upside down? So the beauty of this game is it's almost like a kind of world where you think you know and then you realize you don't know. Okay, so there's always a little bit of that kind of like mindfuck you as you're moving along this terrain and you think everything is normal and then suddenly like, what the F is that? Right, so that's the natural and human-made structures. Then of course he has a ton of supporting characters, and there's also a lot of like dialogue in the background, or not dialogue, more like the voice of the character talking. Then he also has still and static images. There's a lot of text. If you wish to know more, the game has a lot of kind of emails. Okay, you can open up your email in the future and you can read the email that is like about the past. So there's a lot of words actually in this game, but many gamers like kind of like just ignore all that. So therefore their understanding of the game is also limited because a lot of the story is told in the text form. But Kojima is smart. He didn't make the words compulsory. Okay, because I think he knows some people don't want to read, so that one is like optional lah, whether you want to read or not. Okay, moving on. Now, I'm going to just talk, just very short, I just want to mention this. Now, so far I'm talking about linear path and games that use linear path. Now, I'm just going to say this because sometimes you might encounter this and then you'll be wondering, is this game linear or not linear? Now, I'm going to tell you linear pathways can actually be used in games that are not really linear. So I'll use this very good example of this game, Detroit. So if you look at this game, Detroit, in the entire Detroit game, Detroit is known as a game that uses branching narrative, very complicated branching narrative with a lot of possible outcomes. However, if you go into like one scene in Detroit, so I'm showing you, this is a screen capture from the game. If you look at, let's say, one scene, sorry, it's not going to be great resolution because of having to zoom out to show you the entire flowchart. Okay, so this is a flowchart of one scene in the game, and the game is great because they allow you to access the flowchart of all your actions. That's why that time I was like worshipping David Cage, the designer, because as a lecturer, this is like goldmine for me, right? You can actually see how the story is mapped using this flow. So this is one particular scene, and the dark blue or things that are in blue are the action that was taken by the player. And what you can see here is from these actions, okay, you can see there's a lot of choice. So you go here, you can choose here. Now see my laser pointer. The part I'm circling here, these are actions you do, but there's no further action. So sometimes we call this dead end. So you choose this, you do, done already. See, there's no further line connecting this. Then again, do dead end. So some of these actions are given not for the purpose of continuing the story, is sometimes given just to make your character feel lifelike. So you enter a room and then you see, oh, one book there. So you just go and like, oh, because you are like curious, so you just take the book and see what's the book. So that's one action. Then you go and walk somewhere else and you see, oh, got some water there. Oh, let's just drink some water. So you go and drink the water. Of course, you can't do that in the game, but I'm just saying as an example, right? So there's this kind of like dead end actions which are designed to just make your character feel like more realistic. But I want to focus on the pearls. So whenever I'm teaching pearls, I also look at games that have pearl structure, even though the game as a whole might not be linear. So this is a great example. So you see my 3 small pearls, you have choices. I know you cannot see it too well, but you have 3 choices and I've chosen one. I only had no choice but to choose one. I cannot choose more than one. So I choose one. Here I choose one. I choose one. So this is an example of a pearl. What I've been explaining all along. You come here and you can actually do a couple of things and you choose to do one thing. Okay, just because it's a pearl doesn't mean you don't have choice. You have choice. Remember I said you can have choice. It's just that your choice is limited to this pearl that is being given. Then you can have a bigger pearl, which is what these things are up here. Right? You have a much bigger pearl, much more choices going on, and then so happen you didn't choose so many, you just chose this. So when you look at it, you can actually draw like a string, right? The string can go from here, string connect, connect, connect. So it really does look like a string of pearls, like in a linear path. The only difference is this is one scene in a very long game. This is like a easily 40, 50, 60 hour game. So if you want to explore all the path, you're going to have to go back and replay. But essentially, this one scene is a very simple linear path, and the ending also only one only. Okay, so I'm just trying to show you an example in case you all are wondering how come some games can have linear but then the game not linear. What you said linear is linear lah. No, sometimes non-linear can have linear elements inside as well. Okay, so just want to say that to offset future questions that might arise. Okay, so linear path, what are the cons? Obviously there are cons. If you're a gamer, you don't like people to control your life, you may not like linear path. So you're like, alamak, why I have to do this? Like, why this guy have to die? What the hell? I didn't do anything. Why he have to die? Okay, he have to die because I'm the game designer. I want him to die. He will die. Die also, he will die. No matter what you do, he's eventually going to die. You don't have control. So some players don't like that. Okay. And if you're a bad game designers, then sometimes your linear path, you might have story that is disappointing. Okay, so maybe the story is not so great because the path somehow just make you feel like this story sucks. Okay, ever play a game where you're really into the story and then at some point the story does something that totally makes you pissed? Okay, then you totally want to like flip table. Those moments make you can hate linear path for that reason. Alright, so for me personally, I'm okay with linear path, but I'm very careful about who is the game designer. So I pick for my personal choice, if I'm playing for my own pleasure, not for class to study a game, then I always pick carefully. I look at the game designer and say, okay, this guy can I trust him or not? Especially if it's like someone who has done games before. Of course, it's brand new, then don't know lah, have to give chance, right? Not sure. Maybe it might be good. Now the pros are purely mostly from the game developer or game designer point of view. Game designers often like linear path because you are in control ma. You are in control. You don't have to worry players doing funny shit because players can't do funny shit because you don't let them. Alright? So you tightly control the story. No funny business. I want this guy to die, he will die. No such thing. Suddenly the player make this guy alive. I mean, nothing of that is going to happen because my game, I'm in charge. I'm the designer. I'm going to make it happen the way I want it to happen. So no such thing as players screwing up story. And I know among some of you, maybe you are the kind of player like, let me just try to do this one thing to break the game. Okay, there are people out there who do that. Even in games with linear path. Okay, good example is Death Stranding because I know a lot about that game and I've watched a lot of people stream that game. There are people who somehow manage to enter into one location in Death Stranding world where they manage to break the game and enter into the programming part. I don't know what the hell they did, and there was like a bug and they managed to enter it and then suddenly they can open the entire like the sort of like the back end part of the game. Okay, I was like, what the, so people can do all sorts of shit even if your game is tightly controlled. And what are other pros? So if you are the writer, you don't want the characters to suddenly do funny things. Maybe your character is a good guy. Your character will never steal anything. Alright, so you want your character to be consistent. And how to ensure that? You gotta be in charge. So linear path is the right path for you. And of course, the last one, which is also good for players, if you want your players to be emotionally connected to the character, it's helpful if the character has a kind of consistent, believable character development. So you feel like you really care about this character, the character is somehow a character that you really emotionally want to connect with, and a linear pathway helps to achieve that much easier than a non-linear. I'm not saying you cannot do it with non-linear, but it is harder, right? Because if suddenly your character is a very serious character and you suddenly make this character like fall down and then like trip over himself and then like act dumb, and then suddenly this character changes because suddenly look like a dumb guy, and then that might make you suddenly like, why this character like that? Then suddenly you laugh and you don't feel like emotionally connected anymore because you realize, oh my god, that character actually is quite stupid, right? For example. So these are the pros and cons, right? Now I'm moving on to now some technical things. How do games enforce linearity? So if you're creating a game, maybe your game is not very linear. but you want to have some linear elements. Or maybe your game is totally not linear, it's a non-linear game, but certain parts of the game you don't want player to do funny shit. You want them to go according to the path you set. Okay, that can be the case. Or you're doing a 100% super linear game. You want interactivity, but you don't want players to like go off into funny areas. So there are ways that games do that. Of course, the type of games make a huge difference. So I'm going to talk about a few games. So I'm just showing you the games I'll be talking about in this section. All right, and I'll show you some images. I'm not going to show you any trailer, but I am showing you some images from within the game, and you get a sense of also the atmosphere and the art style. So the easiest way to enforce linearity probably is to choose the type of game where you got no choice. All right, so side-scrolling game, platform style game, essentially not a 3D environment. You're not moving here, moving there, wherever you want. You are essentially no choice, left or right. Okay, either you go right, you encounter the bad evil being and you die. Okay, then you go back to the start and you restart and you do the same thing again, and you try to get away from this monster. As you can see, this is from Limbo. Okay, this is a GIF from there. So side-scrolling game, you either move left or you can also move right. So in Limbo, you can also move right. So you can basically move left or right, but that's all you can do. You cannot suddenly move inside the game, right? So you cannot move along a 3D type of axis, left or right. And also there is a limit. So if you play this game, there'll be a point where you try to go right, also cannot already. You cannot go anymore right. That's the end that you can go. But left, okay, left is the progression. You move forward. So linear, always progressing forward. Occasionally move backwards to complete certain things, but then constantly moving forward. So side scroller, best way. Okay, so this is from another game from Playdead, same company that did Limbo. Is this their second game, Inside. Another way for linearity to occur, of course, in the game you get clues. And if you want to progress, you have to follow the clues. So games do things like highlighting the clues. So you can see here, this is the light at the back to, of course, give you illumination so you can see where you're going, because you're underwater, is very dark here. But here you can see there's a light here, which is giving you a hint like, hey, come here lah, you know, can't you see the light is here? So a lot of times these are very basic stuff which you might have encountered when you play a game. You have a light source, then you immediately are drawn to that light source, or you see something blinking, so you want to go there naturally. I mean, humans, we are curious creatures, right? So you get clues like this. Now in game like Detention, same thing. You also have certain images that are highlighted, so you know, go there and click on those images. Obviously other images are not highlighted, so you click, also you cannot go there and click and do anything. So these clues are the guide, and these clues will reveal certain kind of story elements as well, because when you click on it, then certain text is shown that will give you some backstory or give you some historical information, and that is the way to push you forward in a linear form. But Detention, of course, as you can see in this image, is also a side-scrolling platform game, moving left or moving right. Now other ways, easy ways, of course, is create the path where there's no choice. Create what we call obvious path. Okay, so when you're creating a game, make sure certain paths are very clear. Like if you're trying to cross over this giant here, there's no, okay, I tried to do it because I like to try and see if I can break the game. I tried to go here to the side, see if I can jump on his body. Of course I couldn't, because this game pretty much your movement, your spatial freedom is a little bit restricted. So all I can do is cross here. Of course I jump down here, boom, I'm dead. So I go across this piece of wood here. Okay, and this game is unique. The brothers, I might have mentioned this in week 1 or 2, I forget, where you are controlling 2 brothers at the same time. So one hand is controlling one brother and the other hand is controlling another brother. So you can kind of make them like, like come closer or move further apart. But there's a limit as well. So the camera, the screen limits how far one brother can go. So if you want to run away from another brother, you cannot, because the screen will kind of like stop you, or the limits of the screen, the edge. But here is a good example. You are moving from this side, or from this side, come here. Either way, you're using this pathway. So that's simple enough. This game is actually quite what do you call it, child friendly as well. Okay, maybe not easy, some of the gameplay, but the story is designed for kids. Then here, another obvious pathway, something like this. You're on a boat. Okay, obviously you want to move forward, you don't want to be like sitting on the boat, and this boat is fast moving because the water is also pushing you forward. So this is a very rapid flowing river, and you can see the path that's laid out for you because this is the only path available, right? It's the obvious path. Obviously it's a boat, you cannot go backwards because the water is pushing you forward. And this is from the game A Way Out, the same director or game designer as the Brothers game. And here you can also see, if you can observe, far away here you can see it's slightly lighter, brighter, which is trying to direct you like this is kind of where you have to go in case you didn't figure it out. And same game, all right, your boat has a durability, as you can see from this icon here. So how does the game enforce linearity? It makes you go a certain way by also putting obstacles. So if you want to hero and you want to like, hey, let's just try and bash this obstacle, see what happens. Okay, go ahead, bash the obstacle. And then your boat is starting to lose durability. So you bash this a few times, your boat zero durability, boom, your boat's going to break apart. Not game over lah, but certainly scene over. You drown, you die, and then you got to restart from the beginning of the river when you started this portion of the game. So you kind of also know, I need to not bang all these rocks or else I'm going to like have to restart, right? So these are ways that the game enforces linearity. Very simple things that you can do, and this is in-game action, of course. Now also from A Way Out. Now I like Joseph Fares a lot as a game designer because he does a lot of different tips and tricks for how you can have variation in your visuals or how your game looks. So he also used a lot of split screen, and the split screen actually is very challenging because I don't know whether I mentioned this in last few weeks ago, but this game you can play with a friend, so it's a 2-player game, which is why you can see this split screen. So it could be like you are controlling this guy and then your friend using a different controller is controlling this guy. So this actually is a 2-player game. I forgot to mention that. And the way the game is designed, you and your friend can do totally different things at certain scenes. Like this scene, obviously you are playing the game, but you're playing the game from two different sides. This one you facing your friend and then your friend facing you. So when you're playing the game or hitting the ball, it's weird because you can also see your friend hitting the ball. But idea here is you can see your friend can see you lah through this character that you're playing. So your space is restricted here. As you can see, the screen is suddenly split and you are not as free as you used to be. Before this, you can move around more in the 3-dimensional kind of way. Alright. As you can see here, also from The Way Out, now you're together. When you're together, then the screen is like one screen. Then when you are like not together in the same vehicle or transport, then you're split in this way. And there's a point in this game which I like, which is the most challenging part, when you are in I think it's a truck, you're driving a truck and you have to navigate the truck and your friend is doing something totally different in a different location, and there's a split screen and you are watching your friend drive the truck and then your friend is watching you do like something else. So it's like totally different action. Actually, it can be very a bit distracting, and it's a bit of a challenge to stay focused when you have this split screen effect. Okay, so back to the Brothers game. You can also restrict space in a different way, so not with a split screen style, but like here there's a character like trapped in this cage. Okay, so this character is trapped, and remember I said this is the Brothers game where you control 2 brothers. So this brother now has to move around this space to activate this lever to open the door to free his brother. So essentially one brother becomes trapped and the other brother has to free him, that kind of thing. And then later both brothers will have to activate this door or gate in order to progress to the next screen. So there's a lot of co-op happening in Joseph Fares's game, and he's constantly innovating ways to do co-op or cooperative play in an unconventional manner. Alright, so for Brothers, is your 2 hands are co-oping with each other, your left hand and your right hand. Then for A Way Out, you and your friend co-oping, okay, 2-player game. And then I think now he has a very popular game. It's called It Takes Two, which is also 2-player type game. I think it's online 2-player. Alrighty, so I'm going to move on now. So all that is linear pathways, linear strategies to force linearity in the game, within and while you're playing the game. Now I want to talk briefly about endings, because for your group project, I think you all are aware you have to create multiple endings. So let me use the string of pearls again as a visual guide. So for multiple endings, remember I said for your group project you need to have at least 3 endings, but in a lot of games out there can be more than 3, there can be less than 3. Of course, if you want choice, then 2 lah. 2 will be the minimum. Okay, if you have 1, then it's not a choice already. So you can have something like this, where you have 2 choices, and notice one choice can be more meaningful or more difficult to achieve, and another choice is smaller circle, which means maybe that choice is not very popular, or that choice is harder to achieve, or could be easier to achieve depending on the story. Alright, so you can have many things going on in Act 2, and then boom, at the end you have 2 possible outcomes. Or you can have a shorter Act 2 and you give more story endings. Okay, that's also possible. Or you can do very long and have 3 endings. It's entirely up to you. But my advice to you guys for your group is this: multiple endings are not easy to think through. Meaning, if you're going to have 3 endings, why I choose 3 endings is because it's a lot harder than 2 endings. 2 endings usually is like good ending, bad ending. But 3 is what? So then you have good, bad, and then what's the middle? So some students in the past have said, okay, miss, then I have neutral. Okay, what is a neutral ending? Usually neutral equals boring ending. Alright, so if you have 3 endings, you really have to think hard. You cannot fall into the simple, easy way out of good, bad ending anymore. So you have to think. You got to make the 3 endings meaningful and interesting without making one ending like totally boring and neutral, so-called neutral. Okay, so this part actually is not that easy. If you have this headache to deal with, my suggestion is don't make this part also headache. If you have too much headache here, then by the time you come here, you're going to have a full-blown migraine. Alright? So the idea is, if you want to make this simple, okay, then here you can make it more difficult. So do yourselves a favor. No need to kill yourself for this class. Okay, you just want to do good enough or get an A. No need to try and get A++++, because you're not going to get a higher CGPA anyway. So the goal is do what you can and how you can manage it within the size of the group that you have. Obviously, some of your groups are a bit smaller. Some of your groups are slightly bigger only. Okay, so think a little bit about this, and also think about your flowchart. Okay, whoever's going to do your flowchart, if you have multiple endings, if you have a linear story, then nice lah, right? A linear story, very nice or very simple. Okay, straight, boom. Okay, next week when I talk about non-linear, then it gets more complicated. Okay, so either way, whatever choice you have is fine, but just keep in mind the end game. The end game is 3 endings. Okay, so let me show you a simple example again from Detroit, because I have the material and it's the only game that gives you this material so willingly. So here you have one of the scenes from the game, and you can see this is a very simple 2 ending for this scene lah. Okay, not the entire game, just for this scene. Right, so you have all these things you can do. Some of them dead end choices, but nonetheless, go, proceed. Here also one dead end choice, proceed. Just have 2 choices, but look at the nature of the choice. Alright, so for me, when you're doing endings, you really want to think about what are you trying to achieve with this choice. So if you can see the text, I'm not sure if you can read the text, but I'll read it out for you. One choice is, okay, there are 2 characters here, Hank and Connor. Okay, so Connor is this guy in the middle here. Hank is one of the other guys, not in this picture. So Hank left Connor alone. So some people might say, oh, that like good ending lah, because what's the other ending? Hank shot Connor. So obviously shooting, but we don't know what is the outcome because this is not the end of the game. So if you're thinking about this kind of ending, maybe you can say one is negative, one is positive. But always remember, positive and negative ending in relation to what? in relation to the story before, all this stuff that came before, and even before this scene got other scenes. So you might think because the guy hangs short corner that is a bad ending, but you have to be able to justify and explain why is it a bad ending. It's only bad, okay, it's a bad ending because there's shooting, but maybe Connor is a bad guy and you need to kill that bad guy. So the shooting serves a good purpose. So maybe it's not really a bad ending. So when you tell me things like this is a good ending or bad ending, I also need to know why you say it's good or bad. Okay, so don't just label it and expect me to understand that. So that is the part where you have to do the explaining for your group assignment for the ending section. Okay, any questions at this point? Okie dokie. Okay, let's see what's the next slide. Alright, so multiple endings. Okay, tell you what, okay, because I really need to go to the toilet. So let me just maybe we'll take a 3-minute break so we can just go to the toilet and stuff and then come back in, now it's about 4:09, maybe come back like just before 4:15. Okay, so I'll see you guys here in like 2-3 minutes. Okie dokie. And if you have any question, please ask me. Okay, so we're back to this slide. I think you all should be able to see my slide now. So let's talk a bit about multiple ending stories. Okay, so multiple ending stories are a few things that you want to take note of. Okay, so the first thing is you have the string of pearl structure. Okay, but of course the main difference is you have a few endings. Okay, that's the most basic. Now, important to keep in mind, if you have multiple ending stories for linear path, then your main plot cannot be significantly changed. Which means your ending cannot be so crazy that your main plot doesn't make sense. Okay, so your ending can only function in relation to what came before. Okay, so that's one. Second is typically most people have 2 to 3 possible endings. Okay, that's overall in game world. There are some games that try to push the envelope. Okay, so maybe you have like, I don't know, 10, 12 possible endings. But there will be a point where if you are the gamer, you have no interest in so many endings anyway. Right? Because number one, it might not make sense. Like, why got so many possible endings? And number two, sometimes those endings are just there for the developer to say, hey, I got a lot of endings. So sometimes you might be tired because the first part is very linear. So like a bit like, why I want to keep playing it back again and again, no interest already. Okay, so too many endings is just a waste of time to develop. And the last thing down here is you must make sure your endings make sense for the rest of the story, because whatever the player did before must link back to the ending that is going to conclude your story. Okay, so think a lot also about what the player did before. So if, let's say in the game, the player does a lot of non-violent action, and then the final ending, the player has to kill somebody very major. So you might have to ask an important question, which is what would drive that character to kill when that character is not a killer type of personality. So then you have to think, does my story have parts in it that can justify this kind of killing frenzy at the end? Right? Because if it doesn't justify, then I would say you have failed in building your story in a logical and natural manner, because that character suddenly had a meltdown or something. Maybe you can cheat and say, oh yeah, because he had a meltdown, he had a meltdown, and suddenly his entire 50 years of not killing anybody, suddenly he felt like killing somebody. Okay, I mean, you could say that, but I will definitely push you, right? When we have our consultation, I will push you to talk to me about your character. So then you need to have good character design. You have to develop your backstory good enough to be able to justify that kind of action at the end, right? So these are things that the ending is not just an ending. You must relate it and link it in a pretty, what I would call, smooth manner. Smooth meaning I won't ask major question like, hey, what the fuck just happened here? How come your character can do this? If I ask this question, means it's a bad sign already. Okay, moving on. So here's just some examples. I won't show you the trailer, but these are 2 games that you can definitely go and check it out. This game, Catherine, has a new, I think that's Catherine 2, or like a like a sequel to it. So the first one I didn't play the latest one. It was like super damn expensive, I must say, the newer version. But Catherine is a very interesting game. It's very funny. It has a lot of humor elements, as you can see from this guy down here. And you are basically playing this guy. It's a very kind of typical humorous Japanese take on relationships. And the game is designed in such a way that you can have possible multiple endings because your character is going to have certain choices in the game, even though the basic plot is pretty linear. Alright? But you have certain pathways where you have a little bit of possibility to have different outcomes. Okay, and there's a few interesting game within a game, which is what I talked about last week. So like some old games put inside, like, you know, what's that word? Arcade games within the game. So it's a very kind of, I would say, smart, funny, definitely a lot of like trash humor, a lot of male humor. And the puzzles are actually kind of hard, some of them. Okay, so as you progress, it gets like quite difficult. And then you have a game like this, which is also again by David Cage, the same guy who did Detroit. So this is an earlier game from him, and it's called Beyond Two Souls. And the game has, I think, two or three endings. Okay, I can't really remember, it's been so long ago. Definitely more than one ending. And I must say the game is very well designed because my desire to play a different ending was very great. So I did go back to the last checkpoint, and then I played it to see the different ending. So if you have a situation where you want to have a different outcome, you really go back and willing to do it, then I would say that is a well-designed ending. Right? But if you already play one ending and then you're like, I want another ending, forget it lah. That means the game is not designed in such a way to motivate you to want another outcome. Okay, so think of your endings as something that you should motivate your player to also want to have another choice. Alright, so these are two examples. Again, like super dirt cheap now because these are old games. And multiple endings. So I'm going to talk, of course, a little bit about pros and cons. So multiple endings, the good points, players have choice. So if you have a linear game, player feels like very restricted. Then at the end, yay, you know, I got some choice. Okay, good. Maybe the player might have a higher chance of being pleased. Okay, so maybe the player chose an ending which unfortunately is bad, and then the player got pissed, but never mind, I can go back and then get a better ending. So the player might be okay lah, you know, I didn't feel so bad because at the end I still got a chance to get the ending I want. And of course you have some replayability or replay value. Okay, people want to go backwards and sort of do it again, but very rarely do people start from the beginning to replay the whole game, especially if the game is long. They might not be willing to do that unless the game is fantastic. And the last one, of course, is if you have multiple endings that is very different, or you have to do, in order to activate or trigger that ending, you have to go back very much further to play the game very differently, maybe do different kind of things. Then you might actually drive the player to play the game in a new way to get a different ending. So that only works is only if your game is so interesting they are willing to go back and make a new character with a different personality just to get a different outcome. Okay, so this will be like true loyal fans, and you only can get loyal fans if your game is well designed anyway. Now, what are the cons? Okay, there are quite a few cons depending on what you care about. So one is, of course, you need work lah, right? Multiple endings, more work. You have to design the 3 endings or 2 endings. You have to design the scene where those endings occur. Okay, you have to decide what kind of ending you want, you know, good, bad, why is it good, why is it bad. You have to fit it with the rest of your story. All that can be difficult for some people. Now, every ending means more money involved, more writing, more art, more sound. You have to do more programming as well to make that extra ending happen, because you want the player to have it. Even if the player never chooses it, you still need to develop that for the player, because you sold your game as a multiple ending game. And let me tell you, if you are a game developer where you can collect statistics from your players' gameplay, so some games you can actually get statistics like how many players chose this path or how many players decided to do this for the ending. It would so suck bad if you created like 3 endings and then one of the ending nobody chose that ending, and then you spend like months making that ending happen, and then you are like, oh my god, why did I even make that ending? Right? So those are the moments when you be like cursing yourself for like spending that extra 2 months to make that ending that nobody is playing for whatever reason. Now, this third point is quite important. One of the cons is endings actually are the hardest to write if you want your game to end meaningfully. Okay, you don't want your game to have all the ending like more or less the same, right? Then people play it and they're like, this ending, what's the difference? That first ending I killed that guy, now this ending I kill another guy, so the next ending I kill a different guy, is it? So like, what's the damn point, right? What's the meaning behind these multiple endings? You don't want to make them repetitive, and definitely you don't want to make them feel like a chore, like you're doing it because, oh my god, it's just another ending. And last of all, this is probably the biggest reason why large game companies, AAA companies, don't like multiple endings if they have a linear story, is very hard or tough to have sequels or series, depending on the kind of ending. So you want a meaningful ending, right? So you have a choice. Either your character dies or your character lives. So let's say 50% of your players chose your character die. What sequel are you going to have? Because that's your main character. So your sequel is come back from the dead. Okay, can gonna have part 2, come back from the dead. Okay, so you have an entire part 2, come back from the dead. So what are you gonna have the ending for that? Die a second time and come back again, rebirth a game, third sequel. So there will be a limit depending on what kind of ending you choose. And generally, typically, notice a lot of franchise games that have linear story, let's say we use Uncharted, or let's say we use God of War, you never have the kind of ending where the ending is so dramatic, where he might die or lose a leg or lose a limb, or whatever, something that will kill your central character or make him massively injured that will affect your franchise, right? So you also know those game designers, they have thought about their ending to think about the profit for the future possible sequel or series. Okay, moving on. Now here's the pro tip for you guys when you're doing your group assignment. Okay, unless you guys have designed many games during your holidays and now you're all ready to let it rip. Okay, my suggestion is always good to start with linear story first. Okay, now I know it's easy to be very ambitious. I want to make branching narrative. I want to have 4 or 5 endings. I want to have at least huge giant pearls inside with a lot of possible choices. Yes, you can think about all that, but at the base, that means when you start, at least start with a simple linear story. Then from there you can make it more complex, have more choices, more branches, whatever. But at least you must have a starting point and choose an easy starting point as your core, right? So my suggestion would be consider linear structure as your core story concept. So at least you can tell me, okay, my game, act 1 is like this, act 2 like this, act 3 like this. But then I want to change it up, act 2 I want to do this. But basically it's like act 1, act 2, act 3. Right? So you want to be able to have your core story concept easily explained in one sentence, and then after that only you move forward. And why is this an important thing to say is if you start very complex, later you want to make it simple, very hard. Okay, much more difficult. Easier to start simple and then make it more complex. Okay, so that's the pro tip. Whether you want to follow, of course, up to you guys lah. Alright, so I think this is almost like the last section already. So when we think about story-driven games, interactive story-driven games, of course, the more interaction, the better. I'm going to actually ask you all to answer this question. See whether you all can tell me the answer. What are the 2 most common non-linear elements? Because remember, linear is, I basically ask you, do this, you must do this, and then for this to happen, you got to do this. So you're forcing players in a certain kind of direction. But if you don't want to force, if you want them to have a non-linear experience, what are the elements you would commonly put in your game, you think? Okay, anybody? You can also type it in Discord. I'm looking now to see whether you wrote anything. Any thoughts? Anybody?
Open world.
Okay, now open world is a structural thing, right? So if you are in an open world kind of environment, you are no longer in a linear game already, right? Remember from my very early slide, open world is part of the non-linear already. So I'm more focused on the linear path, because today my focus is linear. So what non-linear elements you can put in a more linear but still interactive story? Okay, let me see. I think there's one from okay, Hausen says a big map. Okay, very good. So I'm gonna just rephrase it. So basically Hausen's answer, big map, is regarding space, right? You're talking about movement, the space you're moving in, how large or small it is. And Jared says freedom of choice. Okay, very good, on point. Okay, so both of you. So what do you have? So I'm going to show you I'm going to talk about two particular games, and then I'm going to talk about the two answers that you guys gave, which is also in my slides. So the first, not the first game, but the one game I'm going to talk about is this game. Anybody by any chance have played this game? Just out of curiosity.
Played before.
Played before? Yes, one person. Okay, good. Alright, minimum one person also better than nothing. Okay, so this is one game, and they have a few DLCs, so that's why this is one of their DLCs. So at one point in my life, I was obsessed with this game, and I have all the DLCs, even though this game is like very depressing. Okay, but never mind. And there's this another game, Flame in the Flood, which I'm also going to talk about as some examples of these non-linear elements. So Jared and Hausen, both of you are right. And how are you right? Exactly. Kaching. Number 1 and number 2. So you're talking about choice, which is what Jared says. So the most common non-linear element is choice. Once you throw in choice, then you are giving player option. Option means I'm not controlling you fully, but I'm controlling you a little bit, because I'm not giving you 20 options, I'm giving you 5 options, but I'm still giving you 5 and not no options, right? So choice is good. And choice also got degree. A lot of choice, less choice, very minimal choice, etc. So that's one. Jared hit the nail on the head there. And then of course Hausen also hit the nail on the head. You used the word big map. Big map is talking about space, which means we are essentially talking about movement within space. And what is a game if not a spatial configuration, whether it's 2D, whether it's 3D. So when you talk about space, we are talking about movement within that space and how much freedom do you have. Now, freedom is designed by the game designer, and the amount of freedom should also relate very closely to the kind of story you want to tell. More freedom will give the player a feeling like they are more in control, which also means you have to give them enough choice that their freedom feels like it's worthwhile. If you give them a lot of freedom to move, but the choice is very limited, so it might at the end feel like, where got, I'm not that free, I can move here, but then there's like very less to do. So then you still feel limited, right? So these two things essentially go hand in hand. So I'm going to use this game as an example, Flame the Flood. So this game is another very beautiful game. It's a kind of a unique gameplay. Well, now it's quite common now, where you have water-based gameplay where you're on a boat or some kind of moving on a water kind of transportation vehicle device, and here you're on a raft, and this game gives you quite a bit of freedom of movement, but restricted to the river. Okay, because you're on a river, so you know how rivers look like. It's not an ocean where you can go anywhere, right? So let me just show you a few things from the game. Now, straight away you can see here you have the UI, user interface here, the screen. These are your stats down here. Okay, now this game has a few interesting stats which other games may not have. So the things which you typically associate with this kind of stats for survival game is, okay, you gotta eat, you gotta drink, okay, water and food. Then here you need to sleep, which is what the zzz and the tent is for. But the special thing about this game is they have the temperature stats. So in this game, you don't want to have a lot of water splash onto you, because it will affect your temperature. It will make your temperature drop, and if your temperature drops, you're going to get sick. When you get sick, it will affect your HP essentially. But it's not a typical kind of HP through like fighting or action. It's more based on environmental determinant kind of HP. And this is another similar to the game just now I showed you, A Way Out, where you're in the river, which is a fast pace or fast moving river, and you are controlling this boat. Okay, so this game, you only control the boat when you're on the river. It's actually very hard to control the boat, because you see all these little icons here in orange, these are all your choices of movement where you can go. So you can go to this place which is 154 meters away, or this place which looks like a church, you have the cross there. You can go here which is like a place which has a tent. You can go here which is more forest. So you have different places, and that's your choice of action and also your freedom of movement. But some of these places very hard to reach if your boat is not at a high level. That means you didn't level up your boat to make your boat easy to navigate. Right, so remember my second slide for today's class, I talk about navigable. Can you navigate? Here they link your navigation skill to your boat health and your boat power, which means you got to craft things to make your boat like, you know, better, a better boat, so to speak. So in this game, you are moving through this terrain and the weather changes. Okay, I love games where the weather changes, because weather is a very nice environmental enemy, which is not a true villain. And if your environment is very harsh, you don't really get too angry, because in life, you know, you feel like, oh, environment, yeah, I cannot do anything. Why? It's environment. So naturally, when you use environment to do bad things to the player won't really curse you that much, even though technically you created the environment. But sometimes players don't think about it that way. So you have a harsh environment, sometimes easy, sometimes raining. When rain, the water will move faster and you will get wet. Right? Remember I said you don't want to get wet, because you get wet, then you're going to get colder. When you get colder, you're going to get sick. Your temperature is going to go down. When you get sick, boy, you can die fast. Okay, you can get hypothermia. You totally can die. Like within a few minutes, you can die already if your temperature keeps going down and down and down. So when you're moving through this, so you can see how fast the water is. Okay, from this GIF here. And of course, you gotta make sure your boat does not hit any objects. So when you hit objects, your boat gonna go down, boat health, and you can totally crash your boat, drown, and then that's the end of game. And this game you can set it as permanent death game. So if you want a hard difficulty, when you die, you have to start from nothing. Okay, and if you want it to be not so hard difficulty, you also have to start at the beginning, but at least all your items in your inventory, you can still keep it, right? So this game, do or die, you have to start from beginning. It's just a matter of whether you have some of your inventory or not. It is quite a difficult game, but it's real fun. It's a beautiful environment. Again, the art style, and you have a dog as well. I forgot to say, but you can't see the dog in here. Your companion is a dog that will follow you around. As you can tell, I'm also really into dogs in games. So in this game, you encounter a lot of kind of animal-like enemies, like wolves, for instance. And as you are moving through the space, when you decide, should I go here or should I go here? As you remember from my first slide, right? Where should you go in terms of these locations here? Typically, you won't know whether there's an enemy there, like a wolf. And then later on, as you progress, you encounter bear as well. The bear, of course, is a very strong enemy. And you won't know from this little icon here. So every choice is a gamble. But you have a better idea. Like if it's a forest, most likely you're going to have the wild animals. If it's something like a church, you would think not many wild animals. But you could be wrong. Sometimes you still have wild animals. So it depends. The game just gets harder the further you go down the river, and it's linear because you have to go down the river. The river, you cannot go backwards. Alright, so it's linear in that sense. But there are a lot of non-linear elements because you can choose where you want to go, and then once you arrive at that location, you can choose to do different kinds of things. You can collect stuff, food, you can craft food, you can light a fire, you can play with your dog, you can fight the animals if there's enemy there. So there's various things you can do. But the bigger structure of this game, there is a bigger story. So as you move through this landscape, you will kind of pick up little notes or messages from people who were there before you, and through these messages you will kind of learn what happened to this place, why this place has become kind of like slowly run down and getting destroyed. Okay, so this game is a kind of a very unique post-apocalyptic river adventure game. That's the best way I'm gonna describe it. Alright, so moving on. So that's one example, and it's more cute. Okay, most of the art style gives you a feeling of like, you know, it's not so scary. Okay, maybe a little difficult, but you feel like it's not so realistic. It's much more like animation style, cute, and then there's a lot of fun stuff you can do. Now contrast it with a game like this, which you can tell from the art style and you can tell from the color, this is not a game for the cute people. Okay, you can be cute, but this game is not gonna make you feel too cute. So it's dark, it's harsh, it's gritty, it's realistic, and you can even see no drawing is photographs of people's faces. Once you see things like that, you're like, oh, you know, shit's gonna happen and it's not gonna be pretty. So for this particular game, you have choice of action based on the characters that or rather the characters that you have in your group. So this is a game where you control a small party or group of people. So these are the people that you will control. So you control more than one person. And let's say you have these 3 people in your group. Then your choice is you have to decide what they are going to be doing. Most of this game occurs at night. So at night is when you're going to do the action. So you have to choose who sleeps, who goes out, and things like that. Now the game limits you because only one person can go out. So other people must do other things. Okay, so that's a little bit of the choice, but limited. And then these are the locations within this war zone. So this game is based on a war zone kind of scenario. And the difference is you are not a soldier. You are basically a normal citizen who's trying to survive this war environment. And you're trying to, of course, get food. You're trying to get weapons to protect yourselves. And you're trying to deal with the life within a war-torn country as a non-soldier. Okay, so you are not going to be doing like soldier type activities. You do have some encounter where you can fight with people, but you're not having like the kind of military mission that you might expect in a war kind of game. So here, different locations, and you can choose the location. So once you click on this location, for example, you can see what is there. So maybe on that day you want to collect food, you're running out of food, so you might want to go there because there's food here. Maybe there's other materials to be found to craft. Maybe you have trade, you can trade with people. But you can see the percentage sign. The percentage sign refers to how much of the resource in that place has already is available to you. So maybe if you see 0, it means you haven't actually taken anything and you still have stuff that you can take. But I forgot now whether it's 0 means you got nothing or 0 means you have taken something. Okay, it's been a while since I've played this game. Maybe the person who has played it can tell us if you remember. But whatever it is, this is just giving you a clue where you have been before and what you might need to know before you go there. And here, I think 0 means you haven't gone there at all, because here I noticed got the word visited. Okay, so visited means you have gone there and then maybe you took some things but you didn't take everything, because you also have an inventory slot in your backpack. You cannot carry every stuff. Okay, so what's the important thing to know about choice and freedom? Yes, you can give that to the player even in a linear game, but it comes with certain consequences. So when you give players choices and freedom, you must also build in risk and reward. Not just choice for choice sake, you must also know choice got consequences. Maybe it's a risk to make that choice. Maybe freedom has some rewards, but also could have some negative outcome. Now, choice and freedom also means new narrative pathways. Narrative pathways means you have to give different kind of action areas to move in. For example, this one, right? If you want players to be able to go all these places, you got to develop, right? You got to draw, plan, program, all these areas that the player can navigate. And if you have more options or fewer options, it will also affect you moving forward. So if you give a lot of choice, means when your player progresses, more choice, more action, more options. That means it's not as simple as give more choice for fun, because later you got to think, oh no, that choice is going to have this consequence, that choice is going to have that consequence. So you also got to remember every choice will have future impact for you as the game developer. Okay, I'm not just thinking of player, I'm thinking of the developer here, which is you guys, right? As the designer. And if you give freedom and choices, you also must think, are you going to give them alternative endings? Depending on what kind of choices and what kind of freedom. A lot of freedom, people might say things like, hey, how come my ending is like this? Why couldn't I have another ending? You know, since I have all these weapons, why couldn't I have like killed the guy? Why the guy must kill me? You know, for example. So endings also need to reflect the amount and the nature of the freedom and choice that you give. So these are all things to keep in mind. And just briefly, I want to say about this War of Mine. Most likely, I won't talk about this game again. So I want to take this opportunity to say that this game has some very interesting game mechanics. So game mechanics basically means the kind of gameplay you can execute. And all good game design should think about gameplay. Alright, if you can think of a unique, never been done gameplay, even better. So I always try and show you games where the gameplay is different and special in some way. Even though the game might be old, a lot of games maybe now copy it, but that was the game that started it, right? So for this particular game, okay, this one is nothing new. So you can see here, this is you controlling this guy, and then these are all your NPCs, supporting characters who are talking to you and say, hey, don't shoot. Now, the interesting thing about this game is this game, you are not a soldier, so you don't have the instruction to shoot. So you can actually play this entire game with no violence. Maybe you want to have a gun just to like threaten people, but you never need to actually use it unless you wish. Now, why is this an important thing? Because in this game, okay, in this game, you go out. Nighttime, you go out to scavenge, get food, get materials, bring back home. Daytime, you come back to your house or to your place. Not house, I mean the place that you are homeless in, okay, you're just sheltering there. Now, when you come back, certain things out of your control in the game is bad things can have happened when you were gone. Now, sometimes, okay, when I play the game, this is what happened to me. Maybe it's just coincidence. But sometimes I found that when I made bad choices when I go out, you know, I whack someone, or I try to kill someone, or I steal stuff, okay, from people who are also innocent people. They are not bad people. I steal stuff. Then sometimes I find when I come back, like shit happens to me. So then I kind of start to think like, oh man, I better not do bad things. Okay, so I mean, that's my experience. Maybe someone have a different experience. Maybe they do bad things and then they come back and nothing bad happens. Maybe. But the game is designed in such a way to give you this kind of like uncontrollable happenings, which is supposed to mirror the life in a war zone. Alright, so the developers of this game wanted you to feel what it's like to be in a war environment. And before I forget, the developers of this game, the game company is called 11-Bit Studio. And actually, the original founders of this game, of this company, they are originally from CD Projekt. So they are the same people who did Cyberpunk, but a few of them left CD Projekt and started their own company. And this is this studio, 11-Bit Studio. So they have a lot of this kind of like very serious theme. They are a game company coming out of Poland, so like more like a post-war kind of country in the past. Then the last thing I want to say about this game is choice. So you give players choice. So you tell players you can kill, you can steal, or you can choose not to steal. You can choose not to kill anybody. You can choose to be peaceful, try to help people, give people stuff. So you have players who play it and be like, no, I want to kill people. I like to kill people. So you choose a character and all your character does is kill all the people, steal, do immoral activity. Remember, you are not a soldier in this game. So you make the choices as a civilian, not as a soldier. So with these kinds of choices, okay, the decisions you make in the game are very meaningful, because now this is something, okay, I'm just gonna let you all know, there's gonna trigger warning, there's gonna be something very serious that I'm gonna show after this. So in this game is one of those rare games, okay, I'll say this, I'm pretty confident it's rare. You have a rare game where your actions can trigger this outcome. Okay, so you can do certain actions where at the end, not at the end of the game, but at some point in the game, your character that you are controlling, because remember you control 3 characters, you can trigger an outcome where one of your characters who's doing all this immoral action, it cannot take it anymore and your character commits suicide. Now, thankfully, it's never happened to me. I'm not the kind who would do this kind of action. Like I said, I hate violent type of things. But when I did some research and I found this out, I realized that this is the game company's attempt to show this is as real as it gets, right? In a war zone, you're not a killer, you're not a soldier, you do a lot of bad things, it can affect you mentally. So what makes this game special, this is the thing I wanted to say, this is the only game out there that has psychological outcome for the actions that you do, real psychological outcomes, because one, you're so mentally affected by your action that you commit suicide. This is of course the worst outcome, because then your character is dead and then you got only 2 characters, and pretty soon you're not going to survive much longer with just 2 characters. But there's another outcome you can also generate, which I don't have an image for, but the other outcome is you can make your character something like have a mental breakdown. And what will happen with your character, this is not really a spoiler because I'm not telling you how to do it, you have to figure out yourself if you want to trigger that. But you can make your character have a mental breakdown, so you can see your character there in the screen and you click on the character to do action and the character ain't doing shit. The character is just sitting on the ground crying, and then you're like, what happened, huh? Did I like break the game? And that's when you realize like, what just happened here? And suddenly your game becomes like a whole new level of reality, right? It happened to me unconsciously because I chose like a character that is a bit sensitive. And when it happened, I really thought like, what happened? Why the game cannot continue? Why this character can't do this? And then like really literally I like stuck already. Like how now? Like you really stuck. And then you have to abandon game. And that is a story choice, which I thought was very, very unique. No game, I mean, what game have you encountered where a story choice is a game that cannot end already now? Like literally you cannot end this game because you cannot make the character kill themselves, obviously, because the character just won't do anything. It's like the character just like won't do anything. So the thing I won't spoil for you guys is apparently there's a way to get the character like to be psychologically back to health, but I won't tell you how long. Okay, that one is very hard to know. I had to go and search internet like how to solve this problem. So that is a real gameplay decision, and it was a narrative design choice, and it's not a bug. Okay, some players thought it's a bug, like what kind of stupid developer creating this bug, but it's not. It's done on purpose to reflect reality, and that to me made it a really like amazing game for that reason. Okay, so I'm done. This is my last slide. It's really the white screen of the end. Okay, any questions? Yes? No? Okay, so yes. Hafiz, is that you?
No, that's nothing.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Alright, so basically I'm done with my slides. Okay, let me just stop the recording.